Now, to our top story, and the crisis for the Labour Party continues as Sir Keir Starmer is forced to suspend a second parliamentary candidate, Graham Jones, who was recorded making anti-Israel comments at the very same local party meeting as Azhar Ali. Let's have a listen.
Israel again, you know, and I'm sure that all these people think that when they go home, but you will not get Israel over the line unless we go at them hard.
Well, that uncovered recording has sparked questions over who else attended that meeting and why it was that both Graham Jones and Azhar Ali were not challenged at the time.
The Labour leader is now under pressure to investigate 5 more Labour MPs and parliamentary candidates, including 2 of his own frontbenchers who have made controversial comments about Israel in the past. Starmer has also told activists they will face disciplinary action if they continue to campaign for the disgraced Rochdale by-election candidate.
Now, as Starmer remains embroiled in a row over anti-Semitism, could Labour's troubles mark a change in fortune for the Conservatives? Well, a Savanta poll shows Labour's lead over the Tories has actually dropped by 7 points in just 2 weeks. And with the inflation rate sticking firm at 4%, could there be a tiny sliver of hope for Rishi Sunak? Well, joining us now to discuss this is co-founder of the public opinion consultancy firm Deltapoll, our very favourite Joe Twyman. Joe, you're the man with the numbers and the knowledge when it comes to movements and trends and voting intentions. 7 points in 2 weeks is a bit of a turning point, isn't it?
No, not really. I'm afraid that quite often we have talking points in politics, but it's very rare for a turning point. And you certainly wouldn't conclude that something was a turning point based on just one poll. If you go back to Savanta's previous poll, you see that that particular pollster had Labour unusually high in their previous poll. And this new poll is more in line with what they've been showing for the rest of the year. Deltapoll, our polling most recently over the same time period, shows no significant change from the lead that Labour had in our previous poll last week. So I think it's very unlikely that this will be a turning point that will have a lasting change on Labour's position. Having said that, there is, of course, the danger that that these kind of stories can start to develop a new narrative around the Labour Party that could be damaging. You can't rule anything out, and politics is so often about momentum. But I think the by-elections tomorrow will be crucial for determining that. A 2-0 victory, in footballing terms, I imagine will put pay to a lot of this criticism. And certainly once Rochdale's out of the way, I imagine that very few people will be paying close attention to that. But a 1-1 draw tomorrow could continue these questions. And over the next few weeks, we could see a change in the long-term trend. But I don't think that this will necessarily be a turning point, given that the underlying data, whether it's leadership, economic competence, or so many of the other really important factors, remain unchanged.
Joe, are you saying, I mean, we understand this latest poll was done before this current sort of anti-Semitism crisis for the Labour Party, but it was able to encompass the U-turn on the massive green investment, was it the £28 billion green investment pledge? Do you anticipate that when you add that to the anti-Semitism row, that the next poll might reveal even more people drifting away from Labour, or do you think it's already a done deal and nothing much can change the emerging picture of a Labour victory?
Well, there are 2 dimensions here. There's support for Labour and support for the Conservatives, and in these polls there has been very little in terms of change for support for the Conservatives, and it's Labour that's fluctuated around a bit. It could that future polls do show a decline for Labour, but the question is, will that decline last, or will it be large enough to bring about any kind of change to the overall result? And even the most recent poll, which, as I say, from other pollsters shows a narrower gap, that still gives Labour a majority of around about 90, which is certainly something they'd be happy with. But in terms of a lasting trend as a result of discussions about anti-Semitism and net zero. I can't really see it happening because neither of those is a hugely important issue for the opposition. I think if both of those start to generate a narrative about competence, about Keir Starmer's leadership and about Labour's ability to deliver, then that might have an impact. But so far, the indications are that it's not having a significant effect on the most important factors.
Joe, most people who work in your industry, most learned psephologists as yourself, often say to me that, polls tend to tighten the closer you get to an election. Of course, the general election hasn't been called, but it's being an election year. We all talk about it as if it's imminent and round the corner. Do you think that that's likely to happen over the course of the next few months, however long it will be until we have that election? Or will we see such a sort of amount of disenfranchisement, disenchantment among voters that both parties will start hemorrhaging support to smaller parties?
Well, Alex, you're absolutely right that by historical terms, polls do tend to narrow in the run-up to an election. If you go back to 1997, for instance, in the run-up to that, Labour were on over 57% in the votes, but when it came down to it, they didn't get anything near that in 97, but still enough for an enormous majority. This time around, we don't know. Polling is only ever a snapshot of public opinion at the moment. It is not a prediction of where we will be. Over the next few months, I imagine that by historical standards, we would expect the polls to close. But if the fundamentals underpinning that Labour lead, support for Keir Starmer relative to Rishi Sunak, support for Labour when it comes to the economy and other important issues, if those figures remain where they are, it may be the case that actually the lead doesn't reduce on this occasion. But what I don't think we'll see is increase in support for smaller parties as we get to a general election, because it's in the focusing period of a general election that people tend to move towards larger parties, those that actually have a chance of winning in their individual constituency. And so I think that if the polls do narrow, it will be an increase in Conservative vote and a decline in Labour that we see, rather than support for instance, Reform or the Greens or even the Lib Dems increasing.
Joe, the appalling sort of scourge of anti-Semitism had a terrible effect on Jeremy Corbyn and his chances at the polls, and we know what happened to him. If this anti-Semitism storm continues around Starmer's Labour Party, are things going to get tough for him?
I think while there is the potential for this to be damaging, I think it's unlikely to be significantly important. And the reason for that is that under Jeremy Corbyn, there was a belief, and people can argue and do argue about whether this was indeed the case or not, but there was a belief that, that Jeremy Corbyn himself was at least tolerant to anti-Semitism in a way that previous Labour leaders had not been. Now, as I say, some people disagree with that. Some people believe it was the case, but there's no doubt that in certain proportions of the electorate, people believe that to be the case. With Keir Starmer, that's not the case. Instead, Keir Starmer is seen as being very much against and taking stands and positions against such beliefs. And you can argue about whether it's being effective or not, but generally people believe that that is very much the position that he holds. And so I think that, that further down the line, it's likely that this is not going to have a significant impact on his leadership ratings or indeed on the ratings for Labour generally. But the wider issue about anti-Semitism in the party generally, and particularly its position on Israel and Gaza, could have the kind of disruptive momentum that could damage their position longer term. But I do think it's unlikely to be significant.
Joe Twyman, great to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for your time.